Um, Giving a talk's a funny thing, because if you've got an efficient organiser, like we do, you have to come up with your talk title way in advance, long before you have a clue what is going to happen. So I came up with this talk title in a sort of moment of kind of slightly mad inspiration. I thought it came into my mind, 10 ways to misunderstand Buddhism, and I emailed it off and thought no more about it. And yesterday was the day to write the talk, and a little bit after breakfast this morning. But then talks are also funny things, because they do kind of gestate inside you in a sort of slightly anxious way. You walk around feeling a bit anxious, because this thing is coming up. And I haven't been pregnant, obviously, but maybe it's a bit like that. Something grows, and then when it comes out, it's kind of ready to come out. Anyway, we'll see. So the title is 10 Ways to Misunderstand Buddhism. But this is number 6. And specifically, it's all about detachment. So what the other 9 might be, I don't know. I mean, we could have a great brainstorming here as to what, all the ways people misunderstand Buddhism. And in future years, etc., there might be workshops about other ways to misunderstand Buddhism. Because I do think there's lots. I'm personally fascinated by the concept, a Buddhist concept, of near enemies. Near enemies. You've got genuine spiritual qualities, which are obviously great, but then you've got something that looks like it, but it's not it, and it's dangerous because it's so deceptive. I mean, insects are like this, aren't they? So a near enemy is something that's not quite the genuine article, and it's a misunderstanding, it's very dangerous. So anyway, it's all about detachment, is number 6 in this non-existent series. Anyway, that's the title. But then when I came to write it, I kind of stepped back a bit. And I thought, okay, what's the bigger picture? And the bigger picture is that Buddhism, this great, ancient, Eastern spiritual tradition, is coming to the West. And it's been coming to the West for about 100 years now. And, throughout the whole of my lifetime and a few lifetimes beyond, will be part of that process of Buddhism arriving in the West. So when I was thinking about misunderstanding Buddhism, I was particularly thinking about us Westerners misunderstanding Buddhism as we come to know about Buddhism coming to the West. The Easterners probably misunderstand it in a whole bunch of other ways. But I'm personally really happy to be part of that process of helping introduce Buddhism to the West. I think it's fantastic. Partly because you've got to kind of reimagine it and reframe it and reconceptualize it and translate it and re-express it. So I think when a spiritual tradition goes to a new place, it's a very creative time. And if you look at Buddhist history, it's been to Tibet, it's been to China, it's been Korea, etc. And each time, new things have happened. So here's Buddhism coming to the West. But it's also a dangerous time because you can get it wrong. So I thought, okay, step back, that's the bigger picture, Buddhism's coming to the West. And what is Buddhism's reputation so far as it kind of meets the West and has been meeting it for a few decades? And again, you could have a great brainstorm amongst us lot, how do we see Buddhism? And a whole string of words came to my mind, which I'll just tell you, and then, there might be other things in your minds, and that would be very interesting. But the words in my mind were almost entirely positive to start with. Buddhism seems to have a really positive reputation in the West. Almost too positive, because it's not like it's perfect. Almost too positive. And actually a few things are coming into the news just now of kind of Buddhists behaving badly. In Burma, for instance, or in Sri Lanka a few years ago. Definitely there were Buddhists behaving badly. So maybe Buddhism's reputation will be a bit more moderated, which would not be a bad thing. Anyway, the words that came to my mind were peaceful, Buddhism is peaceful, Buddhism is non-violent, except when they, do bad things to Muslims. Buddhism is calm, Buddhism is tolerant, accepting. Buddhism is all about sitting. Practically every image you see of the Buddha is he's just sitting there, in the classic Buddhist posture. And then Buddhism is otherworldly, Buddhism is detached. Possibly, I don't know about this, Buddhism is a man's thing. I mean, there's a lot more monks than nuns in Buddhism. Possibly it's a kind of esoteric, mystical, Tibetan, secret teaching kind of thing. And possibly, I don't know this, it's even a kind of world-hating thing. You can read some Buddhist scriptures and they really are anti the world, as far as you can see. But basically it's peaceful, non-violent, calm and all that, which is positive. But in my mind it can kind of tip over into this thing, detachment, which is not so positive. So then I was thinking, well, why might it have this reputation? And actually I think all those things, apart from the world-hating thing, are true. It is peaceful, non-violent and so on. But they're like, they're the truth, but not the whole truth. And it's like that bit of the truth has arrived so far. And there's a great simile in Buddhism, one of the classic Buddhist metaphors, of the elephant. So there's the elephant, fantastic creature. We have a tortoise on site, but no elephant, as far as I know. But in this simile, there's the elephant and a bunch of blind men. And the king says to the blind men, go up to this creature and feel it and tell me what it feels like. So they do, but they all get hold of a different bit of the elephant. So one says it's like a giant hosepipe, being, the trunk. One says it's like a tree trunk, being one of the legs. One says it's like a fly whisk, being the tail, etc. One says it's like a tank, being the big body. Anyway, they're all true, but not the whole truth. None of them can put together the picture of the elephant. So all these things are true, but not quite the whole truth. And I think they've arisen, in a sense, a lot for historical reasons, as Buddhism's come to the West. So, for instance, most of the Buddhist scriptures were written down by monks. But, a couple of thousand years probably. The canonical tradition was carried by monks, who were entirely monks, obviously, rather than lay people, and men, pretty much, because there were very few nuns. And that just subtly introduced a kind of bias into it. That you should leave behind women, you should leave behind families, you should leave behind, everything to do with the lay life. So the scriptures just have that sort of bias, because those people carried it. Then they developed a whole bunch of meditations, which obviously they wrote down, to kind of help them continue to leave the world behind as, temptations arose in their mind. So a classic one is a meditation on the 10 stages of the decomposition of a corpse. And you can find it laid out in graphic detail what exactly to do to meditate on a decomposing corpse. If you're a monk and you're in danger of being seduced by worldly thoughts, etc. So it's probably a great meditation for that sort of person in that sort of situation. But, it's not the whole truth by any means. It's a very specific thing. There was a tradition, I think, amongst yogis, where you would leave the world behind by digging your own grave and kind of symbolically dying, and just getting into your grave, and that was the end of you. And you really just left everything behind to go off and be a yogi. So very powerful, but very monastic. Kind of true, but not the whole truth. Then, historical reasons is obviously Buddhism comes to us in translation. And the early translators were a great bunch of mostly English, Victorian, empire explorers in the time of Queen Victoria, roughly. But obviously quite Christian. So they were Christian. And they just naturally translated into a rather biblical language, which is kind of wonderful, but it's not Buddhist language, it's biblical language. And they were looking for words for things, and they just drew on what they knew, which was quite Christian, obviously. So quite a lot about leaving the world and kind of going to heaven, so to speak. Nirvana is somewhere else, because heaven is somewhere else. So Buddhist translations are getting much, much better, but a lot of the classic ones are these old ones. Then another reason is what I call premature non-duality. So there's a whole bunch of Buddhist teachings, but we Westerners are kind of quite greedy people, I think. We want the highest, best, quickest thing. So we just go straight for the ultimate teaching. And traditionally they would have been quite carefully guarded and revealed to you when you were ready. But for better or worse, they've all been translated, stuck into books, and then you can buy them, and there's your instant, ultimate teaching. Which tend to have quite a kind of non-dual flavour to them. Which is all true, great, but it's not what you need when you begin. But people these days, us Westerners, jump straight to their kind of ultimate thing, forgetting there's a whole bunch of other things. And that means there's some quite misleading Buddhist literature out there. And I was just looking at book titles. I was having a clear out, actually, of our little library back home. So one classic book is called If You Meet the Buddha on the Road, Kill Him. I mean, great. If you're sort of enlightened, maybe that's what you should do. I don't know. But if you're a beginner, which most of us are, it's a ridiculous thing to do. So I'm sure the author is trying to say something serious about going beyond dependence on a teacher or something. Find your inner teaching. But it's just misleading. It's just not what you need to start with. There was another book I found on our bookshelf, and I forgot to make a note of it, but I'm sure it was called Doing Nothing. And then the subtitle was, Reaching the End of the Spiritual Path. I'm pretty sure it was that. Doing Nothing. Great. And I didn't read it at all. I put it in the pile to chuck out. But I'm sure there was a serious point there. A classic book, however, is called Being Nobody Going Nowhere, which is obviously in that genre. Being Nobody Going Nowhere by Premature Non-Duality. So a great book, but you can just kind of get it wrong. Do you need to do that at the end of your spiritual path or the beginning of your spiritual path? This notion of doing nothing and being nobody and going nowhere, etc. I'm actually reminded Buddhism has great similes. So one fantastic simile is the spiritual path is like climbing a greasy pole. So you have to climb the greasy pole to get to enlightenment. I've never tried it, but it takes huge effort to climb this greasy pole. You keep slipping back, etc. But when you get to the top, you haven't reached enlightenment because you have to jump off. That's your final thing. So I think these books are about that final stage, jumping off. But they kind of skip the climbing the greasy pole bit, which is, we are happy with that because we are Western consumers, So anyway, that's all premature non-duality to me. And that's one reason we've got Buddhism's got this reputation, but it's a slightly lopsided reputation. So, then I was thinking, okay, what's the problem? What is the problem, if there is one, with this reputation? And I think the basic problem is that if you take these slightly lopsided teachings as a model of the spiritual path, they just might not work. That's the danger. They might not work. It's like having a set of road directions, and the ultimate direction is turn right. But you kind of skip the whole bit about getting on the M1 and junction 24 and all that. And if you just turn right, you're just not going to arrive in the right place. So there's another metaphor, another great Buddhist simile, which says the Dharma, the Buddha's teaching, is like a snake. Right, it's like a snake. And in Buddhism it should be said snakes are dragons. They're creatures of great power, but they're also snakes. And picking up the Dharma is like picking up a snake. But if you pick up a snake, it's extremely important to pick it up at the right end in the right way. And if you pick up a snake in the wrong end, it's extremely dangerous. It's the last thing you want to do. So I think picking up some of these teachings can be dangerous, quite frankly. Either because you get nowhere, or you do yourself some harm. And I have had definitely two friends, when I was thinking about this, two friends came to mind who kind of dived into intensive meditation too quickly. And they went on intensive meditation retreats, like enlightenment or bust. One was my girlfriend at the time, actually. She was very new to Buddhism. She went on this retreat, 10 days, silence, intensive meditation. And she came back in a very, very disturbed state, having had all kinds of insights, in a sense, into the unreality of people. She kind of saw people as masks, just floating around. And when two people met, it was like two masks meeting each other. And everything was hollow, and nothing was real. And very disturbing to her. And it took quite a year or two to kind of get back to a more grounded place. She had good friends, so she was all right, but quite disturbing. I felt her insight was genuine. People act out of their personas an awful lot. And it's very rare to contact the real, authentic person. So it's kind of, two masks talking to each other it's quite a powerful metaphor. But if you're not ready for it, it's very disturbing. Another one was a friend. I didn't know him so well. He went on a serious solitary retreat, enlightenment or bust, up a mountain. And apparently he looked in the mirror one day and couldn't see himself. That's the story that came down. And he just freaked out. He ran down the mountain, telephoned Sangharakshita, who's our kind of teacher and founder, and poured out his story. And he got a strict telling off for, not paying enough attention to the foundations of his practice. Anyway, so it's a problem, either because it won't work, you turn right too quickly and forget the M1, or because it's dangerous. So I think there are a million ways to talk about Buddhism and a million teachings you can pick up. But that doesn't mean everything is appropriate for everyone every time. There is a kind of sequence. And quite frankly, that's like everything, like cooking. You've got to do your cake making in sequence. Driving in sequence, learning music in sequence, spiritual path in sequence. And I think Buddhism starts off quite dualistic. And I think that's a kind of slightly unpopular teaching for us. We don't like dualism, we like non-dualism. But Buddhism starts off very dualistic. Certain things are to be encouraged, certain things are to be discouraged. And when you read the actual original teachings of the Buddha in the Pali Canon, way back when he was walking around India, he was extremely dualistic. He was just completely clear. Do this, do not do that. This is right, this is wrong. This will help you, this will not help you. He didn't actually use the word right and wrong, because Buddhism has the words skillful and unskillful. This is a skillful action, this is an unskillful action, which is a more encouraging word somehow than right and wrong. But anyway, Buddhism does start off very dualistic. Do this, but don't do that as much as you're able. And then you do get a whole bunch of teachings at the beginning of the spiritual path, which are kind of designed to free you up, kind of clear some space in your life for the next thing. And some of these teachings, quite a lot of them actually, are about giving up certain habits and certain patterns and certain even addictions, which you're probably busy leading your life in that kind of way, but they are about giving them up, just because they won't take you very far or make you very ultimately happy. So, give up craving for material things. That, classic Buddhist teaching. But that's not the end of the spiritual path. That's just a kind of clearing space kind of thing. Give it up. I haven't made a list of them, but you easily could. We kind of spend our lives in pursuit of various things out of a belief they'll make us happy. And that's fine, because, to be happy is great. Apparently Buddhists nearly got called, not Buddhists, but Sukhataists. So Buddhist means those who wake up. But Sukataist means those who are happy. So we could have had a whole different religion called Sukataist or something. But I think someone else in India had that label at the time, so we are Buddhists. Anyway, so to be happy is great, but the question is what to pursue to be happy. And certain things just, according to Buddhism, won't make you very happy, so Buddhism says give them up as best as you can. Or at least use them without becoming kind of dependent on them and hooked on them. So going shopping, is useful and necessary, but it's not a religion, it's not a kind of lifestyle. You just go shopping because it's useful. Looking after your body, is totally necessary, but it's not a kind of fetish, looking after your body, preening it all the time. It's just there because it kind of carries you along. But when we really kind of analyse ourselves, a huge amount of our energy goes into pursuing this and that, which a lot of it we could just give up, according to Buddhism. And I think this was the first insight the Buddha had. He realised he had been brought up by his father to pursue certain things. He was a prince and he was meant to pursue all those princely things. But he just realised all those things, the wine and the women and the palaces and the power, all that kind of stuff that goes with being a prince, was going to perish. Sooner or later, it was just going to perish. At least grow old and kind of, fall apart. And he just realised he too was going to perish and grow old and fall apart. So this notion of, the kind of perishable pursuing the perishable, it was a bit like that fox hunting description, the unspeakable pursuing the uneatable. He just lost interest in the perishable pursuing the perishable. And he called it the ignoble quest. There's just no kind of nobility in that quest. So he kind of turned away, left home, etc., led his life, to kind of pursue something more noble. That's what he wanted to do. Anyway, so my point is, that's very dualistic to start with. And it comes at the beginning just to kind of help us clear space in our lives. And one metaphor I had for it is if you're kind of trying to start a fire, quite often there's embers there underneath, but they get covered over with ash. So all you see is a kind of grey ash. And if you want to start your fire, which is there somewhere, you have to do a lot of clearing away of the ash and blowing on it, and everything gets blown away. And then before long the embers are revealed, glowing as they always were, and then pretty quickly the new flames come. So I think that's the kind of metaphor. You give up your TV and your beauty therapy and your, I don't know what, whatever, chocolate, whatever. Crack. Okay, you give up whatever. You give up a whole bunch of things just to clear space in your life, time and space. And then there's embers, that kind of craving for something more is just revealed. It's got some space to breathe. It can feed on the fresh air, and then, according to your metaphor, new flames or new growth or whatever emerges. And I think this festival, the theme of the festival, Fire in the Heart, is kind of about that. There's our heart, somewhere in it is fire. But I think it's interesting, I go to India a lot, and then obviously in the West a lot. And there's a different kind of mood between India and the West. And India obviously is much poorer, life is much tougher, but there's the vitality in India is just staggering. It's fabulous just to go to India and experience that vitality. And you come back here and you walk down a kind of shopping arcade, and people are a bit like zombies. And they're kind of numbed out by all this shopping and, pursuit of things that just won't really work. So I think there is a kind of need to come back to life. And one of the workshops we're doing here, actually, as well as the whole theme of the festival, is a whole bunch of workshops on engaged Buddhism, pioneered by a woman called Joanna Macy. And her classic book is called Coming Back to Life. And her thesis is that we are numb. We Westerners are a bit numb, partly by all the shopping, and partly by a kind of knowledge of all the damage we are doing to the planet. We kind of know it, but we don't want to know it, so we numb out. We just blanket. All that driving and flying and shopping and blah, blah, blah has got a consequence, and we kind of know it, and we read about it every day probably, but we don't want to know it, so we go numb. So she says we need to come back to life, and all her exercises are about that. Yeah. Anyway, that's the theme of the whole festival, Fire in the Heart. So I think you go through a stage of giving certain things up, which you could call detachment, that's completely fine, but it's not the end of the path. It's just the beginning to create space for new stuff to grow. And then Buddhism's classically talked about it as purification. It's a bit like your appetites or your desires find new objects which are just kind of, call them pura. I mean, that's the classic Buddhist word, pura. And then you can just be as passionate as you like. I mean, the more passionate the better. Because your passion is not for some object that's going to perish anyway, or some codependent type relationship. It's just a passion for life. Fantastic. And frankly, it's the opposite of detachment. So you might go through the detachment to get to the passion. And yeah, I think the early Victorians kind of didn't emphasize it, but there's a huge amount in Buddhism of passion for life. The classic Buddhist word is compassion, karuna. And I think what happens is you just recognise more and more your connections with life. So here you are, but we are connected. All of us are connected. And it just becomes more and more instinctive to know that we are connected. So another image is that if you see suffering, you kind of reach out to it completely instinctively in the way that the hand would reach out to the foot. You don't have to think, can I be bothered to help this foot, down there, nothing to do with me. Obviously, your hand helps your foot. So you get to a point where obviously you help somebody who needs help. It's just obvious, you don't even think about it. And a lovely phrase which we use a lot for it is spontaneous compassionate action. Spontaneous compassionate action. So one little test I've got for people who go around preaching non-duality and do nothing or be nobody or go nowhere, the little test I have is, where is your spontaneous compassionate action? Because very often they are going nowhere or doing nothing or whatever. But I think this comes, spontaneous compassionate action comes. So I think you can apply that test to any individual, where's your spontaneous compassionate action, obviously to yourself, but also to kind of Buddhist Sanghas. I would say if there's a Buddhist Sangha, a Buddhist group, you can say to them, okay, where's your spontaneous compassionate action? Because that should be somewhere in their teaching. There might be a lot about meditation and giving up and calming down and creating space and all that, but that's only for something new to come, the spontaneous compassionate action. Yes. So I think that's pretty much all I want to say, actually. And this is a kind of introductory talk. There's a whole festival out there. There's a whole bunch of people doing a whole bunch of things. And in a way, the whole festival is part of Buddhism coming to the West. It might not look like it, but I think it is. And even something to do with correcting a slightly lopsided version of Buddhism that has come to the West before. Because I think this is not a kind of Christian, Victorian version of Buddhism. This is fabulous. I love Buddhafield. And this is not about meditating on the stages of decomposition of a corpse because you want to be a monk. This is definitely about loving life. Yes, but it's also about purification. There's a lot of pleasure here, but there's also a lot of just opportunity to kind of go beyond that and just look for something more. So, I'll end my talk. I'll just say thank you for coming and welcome to the festival and enjoy. Yeah.